What if a map of hell was real? An astrophysicist finds an impossible void in space where physics breaks down. He thinks it's a new discovery, but then he finds a 4,000-year-old Sumerian tablet that maps the exact same spot, calling it the land of no return. When modern science and ancient myth point to the same terrifying place, you have to wonder what it means when a piece of our universe is officially missing. The universe, for Dr. Kaelen Reyes, was a place of magnificent, comforting predictability. It operated on a set of inviolable laws, a mathematical symphony playing out across 13 billion years. His job was simply to listen, to fine-tune the instruments and write down the notes. He did his listening from the Atacama Observatory in Chile, a collection of gleaming white domes set like pearls upon the driest, highest desert on Earth. Inside the main control room, the world was a cool, dark space, silent save for the whisper-quiet hum of supercomputers processing the faint, ancient light of the cosmos. Kaelen sat before a constellation of monitors, his face illuminated by their glow. For the last 3 years, he had been engaged in a task of immense precision and profound patience, mapping the invisible. He was charting the subtle gravitational influence of dark matter, the hidden scaffolding upon which the visible universe was built. He would spend his nights sipping cold, bitter coffee, his eyes scanning endless streams of data, cross-referencing the faint distortions of distant galaxies, signatures of gravitational lensing, with the residual heat of the Big Bang. His movements were practiced, economical, the familiar routine of a man who had found his place in the grand scheme of things. There were no surprises here. There were not meant to be. Every flicker of data, every gravitational wobble was a confirmation of a theory, another brick in the solid wall of known physics. And for Kaelen, that was more than enough. He was in the final stages of mapping the Eridanus sector, a vast, unremarkable patch of sky. As the final data quadrant finished rendering, a process that had taken the better part of 5 hours, Kaelen leaned forward, ready to sign off on the batch and begin the next. But he stopped. On the main screen, a sprawling, multicolored map of dark matter density, there was something wrong. A hole. It was a patch of absolute, featureless black, a perfect circle carved out of the cosmic web. His first thought was a sensor malfunction, a dead pixel on a cosmic scale. But this wasn't just an absence of matter, it was an absence of everything. No faint radiation signature, no gravitational lensing from the surrounding galactic clusters, no temporal distortion. It was a hole in the data itself, a point in space from which no information was returning, as if a celestial hole punch had simply removed a piece of the universe from existence. Kaelen's brow furrowed. He brought up the instrument diagnostics, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He ran a full sensor array check, expecting to see a red line, a report of a cryogenic failure or a data packet loss. The results came back in seconds, displayed in crisp green text. All systems optimal, sensor calibration nominal, data integrity 100%. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. He ran the diagnostic again, then a third time. The results were the same. The instruments were not broken. He recalibrated the entire telescope array and rescanned the quadrant, a process that took another hour. He waited, his coffee forgotten, his heart hammering a little faster against his ribs. The image slowly rendered onto the screen, line by painstaking line, and there it was, unchanged, unmoved, a perfect circle of non-existence, staring back at him from the dawn of time. The next morning, Kaelen stood in the sun-drenched office of the observatory's director, Dr. Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man who had long ago traded the thrill of discovery for the comfort of committee meetings and budget reports. He stared at the image of the void on the large screen in his office, his arms crossed, his expression one of weary impatience. "It's a calibration error, Kaelen," Thorne said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "A cold spot on the primary sensor array that's not showing up on the diagnostic. It has to be. Look for the simple explanation." I've accounted for that, Reyes countered, pointing to another screen showing the flawless calibration data. I've run the scan 6 times with 3 different sensor configurations. The void is there, it's stable, and its gravitational influence is 0. That shouldn't be possible. Even empty space has quantum fluctuations. This has nothing, Thorne sighed. A sound of a man being presented with an inconvenient and childish problem. He walked over to the window, staring out at the stark beauty of the desert. We are an institution of science. We deal in what is observable and provable. We are not in the business of chasing paradoxes that will make us a laughingstock. He turned back to face Reyes, his eyes hard. You have found an outlier, an instrumental anomaly. Write it up as such in your log and move on to the next sector. Move on? Kaelen asked, his voice rising with disbelief. Marcus, this could be the single greatest discovery in the history of astrophysics. A region of space where physics itself breaks down. Or it could be the end of your career, Thorne said, his tone turning to ice. Publish a paper on a hole in the universe and see how fast the funding committee cuts us off. I will not have this observatory's reputation tarnished by this kind of speculation. He pointed a stern finger at Kaelen. Look, write it up, file it away, and forget about it. The board wants results on dark matter distribution, not fairy tales from the fringe. We are not chasing ghosts in the data. To an outside observer, Dr. Kaelen Reyes had simply continued his work. By day, he performed his duties, mapping the cosmos with the detached professionalism expected of him. But by night, he returned to the wound in the universe. Thorne's order to abandon the project had done the opposite. It had fanned the spark of scientific curiosity into a raging obsession. For weeks, the control room became his monastery and his asylum, a place where he wrestled with the impossible. His approach was one of relentless, systematic skepticism. He was determined to prove himself wrong, to find the mundane explanation that would allow him to sleep again. He built simulations, elegant ballets of code and mathematics, each one a different attempt to explain the void. He modeled a rogue black hole, trillions of times the mass of the sun, and watched as its simulated gravitational pull twisted the surrounding star fields into a pretzel, a result that looked nothing like the clean, perfect emptiness in his data. He modeled the decay of exotic theoretical matter, a process that should have flooded the region with a shower of high-energy neutrinos. His sensors showed only silence. He simulated quantum foam instability, a chaotic bubbling of space-time at the subatomic level. His models produced a messy, unpredictable static. The void remained a placid, perfect circle of nothing. He threw every rational, scientific hypothesis he could conceive of at the problem, and each one shattered against its absolute emptiness. His meticulous workspace devolved into a chaotic landscape of scrawled notes, complex equations that led nowhere, and a graveyard of cold, half-full coffee cups. He grew gaunt, his eyes hollowed out from sleepless nights spent staring at the single patch of sky that refused to obey the laws of physics. The scientific method, his lifelong faith, the rigorous process of testing and falsifying, was failing him. For the first time, his search for answers was only creating a more profound and terrifying question. Sleep, when it came at all, was a shallow, restless state. He would lie in his small apartment, the equations still scrolling behind his eyelids. It was during one of these sleepless nights, adrift in the blue glow of his laptop, that he did something he never would have admitted to a colleague. He waded into the murky waters of the internet's fringe. He scrolled past the alien abduction forums and the flat earth diatribes and found a small, obscure blog for amateur astronomers. A headline caught his eye. The holes in heaven. Do ancient star maps show gaps in the cosmos? Kaelen scoffed. It was pseudoscience, the kind of romantic nonsense that gave his field a bad name. He was about to close the tab when he saw the accompanying image. It was a photograph of a museum artifact, a crude drawing of the night sky. And there, in a mess of poorly rendered constellations, was a familiar, empty, circular patch. It was a child's drawing of his own multi-million-dollar anomaly, His heart began to pound. The post was a rambling, speculative piece, but it mentioned a name, Dr. Anya Sharma, a professor of comparative mythology at a university stateside, an expert in pre-Babylonian cosmology. Kaelen's scientific mind screamed at him to dismiss it. It was a coincidence, a trick of the light, but he couldn't shake the image. On a desperate, reckless whim, born of sleeplessness and intellectual frustration, he opened a secure, anonymous email client. He wrote a single sentence. "I believe I have a modern data set that may be of interest to your research." He attached a single file, the clean, terrifying image of the void, and pressed send. The university's Museum of Antiquities was a world away from the sterile, data-driven silence of the observatory. It was a warm, dusty space that smelled of old clay and preserved history. Dr. Anya Sharma was in her 40s, with an infectious, brilliant energy that seemed to radiate from her. She didn't look at Kaelen with the skepticism he expected, but with an intense, thrilling glint of recognition. "I've been waiting for an email like yours my whole life, Doctor," she said, her voice echoing in the grand, quiet hall. She led him past displays of pottery and ancient jewelry, stopping before a simple, climate-controlled glass case. Inside lay a collection of small, flat clay tablets, their surfaces covered in the wedge-shaped script of the ancient Sumerians. "My colleagues see these as simple creation myths," Sharma said, her passion making the air around her vibrate. "Stories of gods and monsters. But the Sumerians were the world's first true astronomers. They mapped the heavens with meticulous care. Their myths were their science." She pointed a finger at one tablet in the center of the display. "Your instrumental anomaly, your hole in the data, it has a name. They called it Kur, the land of no return, the great void." Kaelen leaned closer, his reflection a faint ghost on the glass. The tablet was a 4,000-year-old star map. It was unmistakably the night sky, with the river of the Milky Way and the familiar shape of the constellations. But there, in the celestial region they knew as Eridu, was a small, perfectly circular area left deliberately blank. It was a space where the scribe's stylus had not dared to tread. "The myths are very clear," Sharma said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It was the one place in all the heavens that was not ruled by the celestial gods. It was the place where the laws of the heavens do not apply. The air in the university library's rare bookroom was heavy with the weight of silent words. It smelled of decaying paper, leather, and time itself. Dr. Kaelen Reyes, a man used to the cold, clean data of the cosmos, felt like an astronaut who had just landed on a foreign planet. He and Dr. Anya Sharma were surrounded by towering shelves of ancient texts, the collective memory of civilizations long turned to dust. Anya had several Sumerian tablets laid out carefully on a velvet-covered table. She gently traced the cuneiform script on one of them with a gloved finger, her eyes alight with the fire of translation. "They were terrified of it," she said, her voice a hushed echo in the stillness. "But they were scientists, in their own way. They observed, recorded, and tried to understand. This text here, it describes Kur not as a place, but as an unplace, a cosmic wound, the scar left over from the primordial chaos before the gods imposed order on the universe." Kaelen ran a hand through his hair, the gesture a nervous tick he couldn't suppress. His scientific mind was scrambling for purchase, trying to anchor this flood of poetic metaphor in the solid ground of physics. "It has to be a story to explain something they saw," he argued, his voice full of a skepticism he was trying desperately to maintain. A cultural memory of a supernova, perhaps, a star that exploded violently, vanished from the sky, and was mythologized as a wound. Anya looked up from the tablet, her gaze sharp and direct. "That's a brilliant hypothesis, Doctor, but it's wrong." She pointed from the tablet to a printout of his dark matter map that lay on the table between them. "Supernovas are messy. They leave remnants, pulsars, nebulae, vast clouds of expanding gas and radiation. They are some of the brightest and most energetic objects in the universe. Your data and this tablet, she tapped the ancient clay, both show the same thing. Perfect, absolute nothing. It's not a story about something that happened there. It's a story about what isn't there. And that, I suspect, is far more terrifying. The clash of their two worlds, his of physical cause and effect, hers of recorded human experience, left a ringing silence in the room. Kaelen stared at the tablet, the 4,000-year-old record of an impossible observation, and felt the foundations of his reality begin to crack. That night, Reyes was a man possessed. He couldn't shake Sharma's words. He had to know. If it wasn't a coincidence, then it had to be provable. He had to apply his own rigid methodology to her outlandish theory. In his office at the observatory, he began to build. On his main monitor, he rendered a three-dimensional holographic projection of his data. It was a stunningly complex and beautiful object, a web of glowing filaments representing dark matter, and in its heart, the stark, black sphere of the void. It was the universe according to the bleeding edge of 21st century science. Then, on a separate monitor, he began to construct a second model. Using the star maps from the Sumerian tablets Sharma had provided, he built a representation of the heavens as seen from the city of Ur in 2000 BC. It was a simpler, more elegant model, a perfect celestial sphere. But it was incomplete. He couldn't just place the two maps on top of each other. The universe was not static. The stars were in constant motion. He began the painstaking work of writing a new program, one that would account for 4 millennia of stellar drift, the slow, silent dance of the constellations across the sky. He had to rewind the cosmos. For hours, the only sounds were the clicking of his keyboard and the hum of the computers. Finally, it was ready. He took a deep, steadying breath and executed the command. In the holographic projection, the Sumerian star map began to move. The star patterns slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifted and rotated, playing thousands of years of cosmic history in reverse. Kaelen watched, his heart pounding, as the two entirely separate models, one born of ancient myth, the other of modern data, slowly drifted towards a mutual, impossible alignment. And then, they clicked into place. The two spheres merged, the ancient and the modern becoming one, and the small, empty circle on the Sumerian map slid perfectly over the dead zone in his data. They were the same. The alignment was mathematically, scientifically, undeniably perfect. Kaelen stumbled back from his console, a choked gasp escaping his lips. His own tools, the very instruments of his rational worldview, had just provided the definitive proof. The superstition was real, the myth was a map, and he had just found X marks the spot. The next morning, the real world came crashing in. He was summoned to Dr. Thorne's office. The director was standing behind his large mahogany desk, his face a mask of cold fury. In his hand, he held a printout of Kaelen's emails. "I warned you," Thorne began, his voice dangerously low. "I told you to drop it." He threw the papers onto the desk. "You're collaborating with a mythologist. Are you actively trying to destroy this observatory's reputation? To make us the punchline of every scientific journal on the planet?" Kaelen was speechless. Thorne had been monitoring his network traffic. "I don't know what kind of fantasy you're indulging, Reyes, but it ends now," Thorne continued, his voice rising to a venomous roar. "You are to cease all contact with this Dr. Sharma immediately. You are to scrub any mention of this from your logs, and you are to delete this Kur data. Erase it from the server and from any personal drives you have. This is your only warning. If I hear one more word about this, your career in astrophysics is over." Thorne's threat had driven them underground. Science, in the official sense, was now forbidden territory. So, Kaelen Reyes retreated into history. Dr. Sharma's home office became their new control room, a chaotic and wonderful space overflowing with books, maps, and the ghosts of forgotten languages. It was a fortress built of paper and knowledge, a place where Thorne's sterile authority could not reach. One night, surrounded by stacks of books on Mesopotamian culture, Anya made a new discovery. She had been meticulously working through a lesser-known tablet, a fragment of a larger epic. "Kaelen, listen to this," she said, her voice hushed with awe. "It's a cautionary tale." She began to translate the delicate, wedge-shaped marks. "It describes an attempt by the god Enki, the god of knowledge and creation, to understand Kur. He was not content to simply map it. He wanted to know what was inside." She paused, her finger tracing a line of script. "He crafted a gleaming skyboat, a vessel that shone like a star, and sent it on a path into the great void. But the skyboat did not return. The tablet says it was swallowed by the silence, and its shining light was extinguished forever." Kaelen felt a chill run down his spine. A shining vessel, sent on a mission of discovery, swallowed by the void. It was an ancient echo of a mission he would have designed himself. "Did they know what happened to it?" he asked. "No," Anya said. "The connection was severed. The story ends there. But there's something else." She pointed to a short, repeating sequence of symbols at the bottom of the tablet. "These markings are separate from the main text. They don't appear in any lexicon I know. They aren't Sumerian words. I don't know what they are." Days later, back in his own office, Kaelen couldn't get the strange symbols out of his head. He had a high-resolution photograph of the tablet on his monitor, the strange sequence of markings magnified. They were elegant, geometric. They weren't words. He stared at them until his eyes burned, the patterns swimming in his vision. And then, in a sudden, breathtaking flash of insight, he saw it. He was a man trained to see the universe in numbers, in the spectral fingerprints of distant stars. He wasn't looking at a language. He was looking at a code. "They're not words," he whispered, his heart beginning to race. "They're stellar classifications." The symbols, a wedge, a circle, a series of vertical lines, corresponded to the spectral classes of stars. O-type, B-type, A-type. It was a sequence, a designation. It was a modern scientific name written in an ancient hand. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his mind racing. He wasn't searching historical archives anymore. He was searching the declassified records of deep space probes, looking for a mission that used that specific stellar sequence as a project code. After hours of digging through old NASA and Soviet-era files, he found it. It wasn't a well-known mission. It was a footnote in the history of space exploration from the late 1970s. Project name, Pioneer 12. An unauthorized, long-range probe launched by a secretive division of the government, tasked with testing experimental propulsion systems. The mission was officially logged as a failure. The probe had gone silent just a few years after launch. Kaelen pulled up its last known trajectory, his breath catching in his throat. It was aimed directly, precisely, at the coordinates of the void. Enki's gleaming skyboat had a name. Gaining access to the Deep Space Network's long-term archives was a risk. Thorne would be monitoring his activity, but Kaelen didn't hesitate. Using a series of backdoors and his own high-level credentials, he tunneled into the oldest, dustiest corner of the server, a digital graveyard for forgotten missions. And there it was, a single tiny data packet labeled Pioneer 12, Final Transmission, Sensor Malfunction. He downloaded the file. It was less than 3 seconds of raw telemetry, the final gasp of a dying machine across an impossible gulf of space and time. He opened it, and a stream of numbers filled his screen. At first, they looked like nonsense, corrupted data. But as he stared, a cold, profound horror began to settle over him. The numbers weren't corrupted, they were impossible. Energy readings were returning negative values. The probe's measurement of the universal gravitational constant was fluctuating wildly, as if the very fabric of space-time were coming undone. Subatomic particles were resolving their quantum states to absolute zero, ceasing to exist in any meaningful way. It was the data of a universe having a complete nervous breakdown. It was the frantic, final report from a place where the laws of reality had been repealed. This was not a sensor malfunction. This was the instrument, in its final moments, reporting the truth. He now had the first piece of empirical instrumental proof. The 4,000-year-old myth was right. The science was right. And the truth they both told was that a piece of the universe was fundamentally and terrifyingly broken. The lecture hall was a coliseum, and Dr. Kaelen Reyes was being fed to the lions. He sat in the audience of the annual astrophysics conference, a ghost at his own execution, and watched as Dr. Marcus Thorne stood at the podium, systematically dismantling his life's work. Thorne was a master of academic assassination. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke in the calm, assured tones of absolute authority. He began by praising Reyes's early work on dark matter, establishing him as a brilliant but perhaps overly zealous researcher. Then came the turn. He put up a slide of the void, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. As is common in projects of this scale, Dr. Reyes encountered an instrumental anomaly, Thorne explained to the rapt audience of Kaelen's peers. A simple sensor glitch, a cold spot, that created the illusion of a data void. It's a textbook case of an interesting but ultimately mundane calibration error. Then he delivered the killing blow. Unfortunately, Thorne continued, a look of faux paternal concern on his face, Dr. Reyes developed a kind of obsession with this glitch. He began to pursue unorthodox, and I must say, highly unscientific avenues of inquiry, even going so far as to consult with experts in ancient mythology. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Kaelen felt his face burn with humiliation. Thorne didn't need to name him. Everyone knew. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale. The man who chased ghosts in the data. That night, Kaelen's apartment felt like a tomb. He sat in the dark, the impossible telemetry from the Pioneer 12 probe glowing on his laptop screen. It was the truth. It was the proof. And it was utterly worthless. Thorne had already inoculated the scientific community against it. If he released this data now, it would be seen as the desperate act of a disgraced crank, further proof of his obsession. He would be a laughingstock for the rest of his life. Anya Sharma sat with him in the silence. She had watched the public execution from the back of the hall. She looked at the stream of impossible numbers on his screen, then at the defeated man beside her. She placed a hand gently on his arm. "The Sumerians weren't afraid of this truth, Kaelen," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They couldn't explain it. It terrified them. But they respected it. They wrote it down so we would know. They did their duty as observers." She looked him in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "The question is, what do you respect more? Your career or the truth, no matter how impossible?" Her words hung in the air, a simple, devastating question that cut through all the noise of his ambition and his fear. Was he a scientist, or just an employee of the scientific establishment? What was his ultimate duty to? The institution, or the universe itself? The final session of the conference was ending. Dr. Thorne was on stage, accepting applause, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. As the attendees began to stand and gather their things, a lone figure walked from the back of the hall, down the central aisle, and up the stairs to the stage. It was Kaelen Reyes. A hush fell over the room. Thorne's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure fury. Before security could intercept him, Kaelen reached the podium and plugged a flash drive into the main laptop. He didn't say a word. He just changed the projection on the massive screen behind the stage. He didn't show his complex dark matter maps or his elegant simulations. He showed two images, side by side. On the left was the 4,000-year-old Sumerian star map, with its crude, hand-drawn constellations and its small, deliberately empty circle. On the right was the final chaotic telemetry from the Pioneer 12 probe, a frantic stream of impossible numbers. Kaelen turned to face the stunned, silent audience. His voice when he spoke was not angry or defensive. It was the calm, clear voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. "I can't explain what this means," he said, his voice echoing through the vast hall. "I don't have a theory. I only know that two different maps, one from the dawn of civilization and one from the dawn of the space age, are telling us the exact same thing." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the most brilliant minds in his field. "A piece of our universe is missing." What makes this story so powerful is its respect for two different ways of knowing the world. On one hand, we have Dr. Reyes and his astrophysics, a world of hard data, empirical evidence, and the rigorous scientific method. This is the language of truth we are most comfortable with today. On the other hand, we have Dr. Sharma and her ancient texts. We're taught to see these as myths, as stories, not as data. The genius of the narrative is that it refuses to treat one as superior to the other. Instead, it presents them as two independent research teams, separated by 4,000 years, who arrive at the exact same, impossible conclusion. The Sumerian myth isn't just a superstition to be debunked. It's treated as a valid historical observation, a 4,000-year-old data point. Dr. Thorne, the antagonist, represents the danger of scientific dogma, the refusal to even consider evidence that comes from outside its own rigid framework. The story's climax isn't about science proving the myth or the myth predicting the science. It's about the terrifying and awe-inspiring moment when both systems of knowledge hold hands and point to a truth that is bigger and stranger than either of them can fully explain. It leaves us with a fascinating dilemma about how we define evidence. So, I'm curious to know your thoughts. If you discovered something that was scientifically impossible but historically documented, which truth would you choose to believe?